Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today I'm with Will Hu. Will, can you give a quick intro about yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Will Hu. I'm the co-founder of Flagler House. We work in musculoskeletal space, building the next generation operating system for the providers. My background is a lot of it is in machine learning for healthcare, so I do a lot of disease detection, disease progression, analytics work.
Very cool. So I have a big soft spot for healthcare because I came from the healthcare life science space. Healthcare AI right now is having a pretty big moment. But AI in healthcare isn't exactly new, is it? Like, can you tell us a little bit of what happened in like the early days of AI in healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say starting about like 20 years ago, where the government is starting to mandate and encourage and even penalize the providers for not doing so, like they want you to adopt electronic healthcare records. So, for example, like if you've been to the hospital recently, you probably the doctor give you access to my chart. That is for Epic. That's like one of the biggest hospital records providers. So what that does is essentially allowing all of the data around your visits, about around your vitals, the reports you have, all being kind of like digitized into a very data-rich environment, right? And then the goal of that is to you can use that data to power different analytical systems, different AI systems. But I would say in the very early days, for example, like if you start from the early 2000s, right? Where the technology really hasn't changed since the 1960s, 1970s in terms of what AI, what models are available out there. So people tried and failed to build a lot of like decision support systems that I think still gives some investors some bad taste and some bad taste in the mouth. And providers doesn't really tend to use it. And that's when people discuss, oh, like doctors don't like another portal to be open. And if you um, and if you kind of like put information back into the EHR, if you get too many of it, which is what usually happen in like I think it's called Epic Advisory, where just people would just ignore it. So it had a really difficult time getting adoption. But I think as we move forward into like the 2010s, where you see more and more mature deep learning techs, that's when I think AI scribing kind of becoming a thing. And the hope is to say, if you're capturing all the conversation in the ambient setting, recording everything in the room, then you can relieve a lot of pressure from the doctors. You can use that for better billing. Um, but that really, I would say, you're starting to see companies like, I think, companies like a Bridge getting into the scene these days with more generative AI powered AI scribing. But that's in probably towards the end of 2020s entering now. And what you will see now is essentially a lot of AI-enabled services where people are heavily investing and building an AI-powered agent. So like you will get a phone call to schedule appointments, and that will be AI, and then you wouldn't even know that that's there. So I think the ChatGPT aha moment kind of like hits all of us, but it has been building, I would say, over the past two and a half decades.
How interesting. So, like, what's happening right now in the healthcare space? Like, what's different?
So I think the biggest difference is you will see instead of people are trying to build, like I was in the past decade or so, right? Like you'll see a lot of people building point solutions and trying to sell to because people are still in kind of like the SaaS mind space where you're trying to build a solution, you're trying to sell the same solution to get scale. But I think it's come to a point where people realize like you kind of have to dog food your own services first because healthcare is first and foremost a service business, and every setting is kind of unique, every provider is kind of unique. So in order to build like a highly scalable software solution, like you want to be connecting the dots within the practice. You want to learn how they're doing certain things. You want to learn like what kind of point solution can you combine into a single package. Because I say like what we were talking about just earlier, where you have 2 decades of learning experience about selling AI to the doctors. Like, how do you actually make money from it? I think people realize it's actually quite difficult to go to whether it's hospitals or provider groups. Like the sales cycle are usually longer. The willingness to adopt technology is usually a little bit lower. So what people are doing now, and with the capabilities increase, if you've seen like the agents capabilities to be able to deliver really empathetic conversations, to diagnose patients, to have like interactive conversations, right? That really allows companies like us to bundle healthcare AI and a bunch of other health tech enabled services together. Now, from economics perspective, you're then instead of just selling to an IT budget, you're selling into the operational budget of these service industry practices, which actually makes it a lot easier. Like you have a much bigger addressable market, and you're actually able to do a lot of things that you weren't able to get to before. Like in our company, one of the principle is to say, we want to provide the best solution for the providers, but we don't want to change their workflow. So from the tech side, we try to abstract everything away, and from the services side, like there are things that's inherently difficult for people to do, whether it's just because it's too much work or it's very hard to keep track of things. So with AI, like providers like us are now trying to essentially take over the whole flow to provide what you are purchasing a tool to do as a service instead of just giving you a software and hope for the best for it.
Now, I've noticed that when I Googled you guys recently not were nominated for a provider diagnostics in the Digital Health Awards earlier this year. Can you tell me a little bit of like what type of diagnostics you guys were working on?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. So it was quite an honor to be considered like this kind of early in our journey. I think we're probably the youngest or second youngest in terms of tenure to be nominated. It was quite a surprise. So I would say when we talk about provider diagnostics in the category. Like essentially, you're trying to build, and so does I would say many other healthcare AI startups. You're trying to build some kind of AI doctor that's capable of diagnosing patients or providing some kind of care to the patients. If you look at the publications and what I was doing earlier in my career is essentially trying like, can we build a all capable AI doctor that can diagnose any disease, that can predict things. Let's say if you want to predict breast cancer 5 years before it ever shows up on a scan, right? So that was the hot period for a while, and that's what I worked on for a long time. Um, but most of the use cases in that case, because it's essentially most of those studies are sponsored by pharma companies doing like drug targeting, trying to find the best possible target patients or what they would call opportunity patients for their drugs, and usually the big spenders are oncology drugs. Um, what I can come to realize that if you really want to figure out who's the right patient at the right time and what's the right treatment for it, it really is about timing because you want to build an AI system that sees everything the doctors see and evaluate it the way the doctor do, which means you'll say, oh, what's your current concern, right? What happened to you in last month? How are you feeling? What happened to you in the past 6 months? What happened to you in the past year? So essentially trying to look back into what happened to you over time and to see how your reaction was to different treatment regimens over time. So essentially we developed this kind of temporal recommendation system or temporal approach to understand disease progression. Because then there's things that mechanically happen to your body, like you're aging, you had an injury, um, and there's things like sepsis, where the patient could be doing very well for a long time, and then boom, you just start trending downwards. Same thing for oncology. And in those kind of like mechanically powered diseases or linearly progressing diseases, so another other example other than ortho or musculoskeletal would be like rheumatology, cardiology, um, and I would say diabetic patients, right? all of those carry the same trait where there is a kind of a predictable trend that you can follow. And then what we try to do, or our AI doctor is essentially trying to follow those trends, see how you're doing, and see if this is the right time for intervention. And if so, like what's the best treatment match to it. And that actually, I believe, carries massive, massive benefits to the patient population. If you think about it, like doctors have too many patients and they can't see all of them, right? And a lot of the patients get lost in the cycles, lost in the journeys. So essentially, you want to find out who is the most severe patient, wow, who's the most undertreated patient. You want to get them better and get them faster. Like an example I always give to people in terms of understanding um, how massively beneficial this could be is, for example, asthma. I think about 25 million patients in the US a year have asthma, which you can just do with inhalers. And 10% of those population have moderate level of asthma, which then means you need some kind of steroids. What you always run into is once you say, oh, the inhaler doesn't work, you go to a couple of different doctors, you try different inhalers, and then a couple of years later, you say, oh, like maybe let's try steroids, and you try the same cycle, and until like 10% of moderate patients will have what's called severe asthma, and those needs biologics, like the highest level of treatment in the line of therapy, but you won't really get to it until you wasted a couple of years. You suffered a lot where you don't really need to, right? Because you see, oh, you failed to respond to two different steroids. You should immediately be moved up to a specialist to be evaluated and to try out biologics.
And how interesting. So, so what do you think needs to happen for like healthcare AI to have like the greatest impact?
I would say it's actually going to be policy related because if you look at what are the biggest healthcare companies or trends in healthcare companies in the US over the past decade or so, it's essentially really policy driven, right? One, I would say US is the only country that allows direct to consumer advertising. That really brooms the entire industry of data aggregator, analytics companies, consulting companies, and even like privacy related companies trying to figure out who writes the most scripts for a particular drug, who has the tendency to write script for a particular drug. And then you have all the way until like the credit agencies in terms of providing consumer data to you, like what you read, what's the best channel to target you. There's intake companies who sell their product for free, but then make their money by selling eyeballs during intake. So all of it direct to consumer advertising allows and enable a lot of what the US healthcare industry on the sales side or on the marketing side is using. And if you look at the Affordable Care Act, so a lot of the ACA marketplaces, Oscar House, there's company like Devoted Health and other like Medicare Advantage plans. And then I believe now Medicaid is also trying to do similar things with their HMO plans. So policy really drives a lot of it. And in my particular line of work, I would say integrations and privacy is another thing. Like you have HIPAA, um, high tech, and now like TAFCA and other like care interoperability networks that you have to deal with. A lot of it is policy driven, it's redundant, it's kind of like compliant. Because if you're talking to people about how secure and compliant HIPAA really is, I mean, the standard really isn't that high. But it just makes you go through a lot of work. And all of those policy created companies, whether it makes sense or not. If you look at that lens, right? Payment models for AI-enabled services or using AI in healthcare really need to change because right now, if you go to the hospital, you bill for like follow-up visit, you bill for a remote telehealth visit, all of those codes essentially are time-based. And when they're designing those codes, they're thinking about, well, if a human is doing everything manually, going through records, writing reports, uploading them, figuring out like what to say on every step. That's how they calculate the times, right? They do it in 20, 30, 40-minute increments. When in reality, like if you actually build the AI enabled platform, you don't really need that much time to provide the same level of care, if not better, to the patient. So the payer side needs to adjust to make it easier to allow usage or allow the use in assisting to provide the healthcare solutions. And if you take one step further, like if I have if I'm using my AI therapist to provide care to the patient en masse, right? Human are barely involved, maybe just there as a safety, as a safeguard to, or to whenever patient actually needs some hands-on care. Like if AI is so good at providing care, to the masses, at a very cheap cost, right? But insurance company does not reimburse the use and development of that technology, then no one would do it. Um, and I would say going back to like the first topic we discussed, right? Like what was the AI company that started before this decade? The most prominent ones are going to be radiology companies. So they're going to scan your reports, scan your imaging, and say like what's happening to you, make a judgment, make a read on it. There's something called I believe it's new technology add-on payments or NTAP. So essentially, if you're in a hospital setting, right, if you get an MRI image in the hospital, they have the right software installed, they get paid $1,000 every time that image comes through, which in a sense is kind of like it's robbing the bank. It's costing the healthcare systems a lot of money, and it kind of favors the inpatient hospital utilization side of things versus you want. I mean, the imaging could be done anywhere. Like you don't need to do them in the hospital. You don't need to. And even if the doctor did not review or disagree with AI, they will still get paid $1,000, which in my mind seems a little ridiculous, right? I think that's the payment model as is today either creates adverse incentives to wide adoption of AI and or it just straight up prevents it. So I would say because we built with the assumption, I believe a lot of the founders all built with the assumption that based on where we are today on the technologies and based on where we believe it will be in 5 to 10 years time, we could do a lot more by either augmenting people or just straight up replacing some of the um, tasks that make sense. But then policy has to change, and they're so far behind.
So I'm curious as to whether or not like Medicare and like maybe like other payers, whether or not like they're paying for AI at all. Like what's going on in that space?
Um, The the only thing that I am aware of is the thing that I just mentioned is called national add-on new technology add-on payments. So essentially you will have to get certified to say you have novel technology that was developed for the first time, and the rules and criteria essentially goes to um it makes the most amount of sense for radiology-based startups because you can say like this is a software process, this is an algorithms that we develop and then to do a specific thing. So that's the most prominent one. Otherwise, like Medicare actually prevents you from using anything but a US based personnel to perform the time-based cares. So let's say you could do it today, AI could perfectly do it today. No one would do it because they wouldn't get paid for it.
So it's interesting that you mentioned this. I don't know if you know this, but half of the doctors today are hospitalists, which means that they're employed by the hospital versus like working in like a private practice. So from my point of view, it takes a mountain of effort to like build and deploy these technologies. And you work with these practice groups, right? So like how do you help them adopt like new AI tech?
That's a great question. So right now, you see um, right now you see a lot of point solutions, right, trying to sell into the same practice. And I think that's a terrible waste because a lot of these solutions really rely on the same delivery mechanism. So they rely on the same write back integrations to put some piece of information back into the system. Um, I think what we are doing is essentially build some kind of um, process that's applicable to everyone. So we can ingest all their data, um, use collectively for training, kind of like spread the cost across different people and different practices. So that allows us to build a centralized model, but kind of deploy it in a customized way to the practice that we're in that spreads out the training costs. And then when we're doing kind of this business in a box model where we are the sole provider for multiple used to be what at least what we used to be multiple point solutions, right? We can also spread across the cost of doing integration and everything kind of that's downstream. So this way allows us to reduce the cost and to your point, like healthcare integration costs a lot of money. If you do a old school HL7 integration, usually it costs somewhere around like $5,000 to $7,000 per interface, and you're gonna want um probably 3 to 4 different interface to for your application to actually work. And then you have to pay 20% annual maintenance costs on top of it. But then if you're using the same structure to build 5 different solutions to the provider, the cost is the same. And when we do this approach where we work with the provider, we integrate with them, and we bolt on other services, that just really allows us to the achieve like the marginal incremental economic benefits for them. This was a solution that they wanted to deploy themselves. They couldn't do it with the without significant investment or run it profitably, or it just physically can't do it. For example, like if you don't have in-house physical therapists, right? How would you ever offer some kind of remote telehealth-based physical therapy guidance or augmentation to the physical therapy by yourself and keep track of all the compliance regulations? So then we develop enterprise level technology and we deploy and we work with all of the little providers so they have access to what used to be only available to the hospital systems.
So, like, what excites you about like the future directions of implementing like AI in healthcare?
So I would say it goes down to two things. One is related to actual data delivery, actual care delivery and data capture. For example, like with ambient scribes recording everything that's in the during an actual visit, and with solutions like ours trying to build up that digital front door to trying to interact with patients when they're outside the practice. I think the what would really be helpful is once we combine the two together, that contextual data on how the patient feel, what the patient believe, what patient is going through on a day-to-day level, on top of what they're telling the doctor and how they're describing the situations to the doctors, you will see uh you will really see like the actual holistic patient view and patient journey, um, and use that to provide information. There's a study that comes out today where I think ChatGPT is doing better versus the actual doctors in terms of being empathetic or being comprehensive in um, evaluating the patient history and patient diagnosis. I think a lot of it really just to do with context and right context. And with the technology we're building today, I think we can make that happen where you have all the information all the time to pinpoint to the exact thing that would drive the right decision, the right care. And then the second thing is a little while ago, like AlphaFold is released into um, open source. I think that is really cool because you see the stuff we're using today and developing today are essentially research from what 2016, 2017 being scaled up, being built up and into production, right? They're being commoditized and they're being built into deeply integrated vertical services that that actually give you ROI that delivers value to different stakeholders. And if you think about what was a great promise before, but also kind of like fell flat on its back, um, I would say drug like using AI in drug discovery, using AI in creating new medicine. That I do believe is in 5 to 10 years is going to be experiencing the same way of excitement as what we're seeing with straight language model, where you can understand protein structures, you can design new molecular structures. I mean, it used to be that if you can do it with the computational approach to figure out the structure of a protein, where what AlphaFold can do in a minute, I think you will get a publication in Nature. That's the kind of work that it is replacing, that is advancing forward. So I think that has so much potential, and that's really something that's very special.
So what about like the potential impacts on, say, like healthcare jobs, especially in the age of AI? Like what's going to happen?
Um, I I think some low level jobs, very repetitive tasks, will undoubtedly be automated. We are doing some of it in-house, like for example, getting reports from a certain site or just uploading documents or figuring out like what's being said on a fax and type it in. A lot of those jobs where it's really low level just requires someone to act on it. I believe AI will have enough IQ and capabilities to do it very soon. And so but I see overall, because healthcare is a deeply human profession, right? I actually believe will create more jobs because AI will be used to augment human healthcare providers, where you can see more patients. One of the discussions I sometimes see or debate I sometimes see is if AI scribe, for example, is removing the burdens of documentation, the time limits that you place on a provider, so the provider couldn't see more patients, right? What would happen instead? Like, would the providers be forced to see more patients, or are they able to spend more time with the patients that they're already seeing to deliver something better? I think we're going to want to get to a state where like AI is augmenting enough where you're not being burnt down, and we do something that actually allows you to see more and more patients and deliver better care over time. So I think there's absolutely going to be a need to have those providers capable of working these AI augmented platforms. Like AI can handle repetitive tasks, right? Analyze data, provide insight, but some human will still ultimately have to leverage these tools to make an informed decision, to have that conversation, and to build relationships with patients. And
Well, yeah, thanks so much for sharing your insight on the, the past, present, and future of AI in healthcare. It's clear we're at like a pivotal moment, and the potential for like positive impact is, quite immense.
yeah, it's thanks for having me. It's really excited to see how like AI is being built and used to kind of like transform healthcare, and excited to be leaving a footprint in this journey as well.
Well, again, thanks so much for being on the show, and until next time, stay curious.